Welcome back to History 121. All right. This is the second part of our lecture on Christianity and Rome. When we left off last time, we were starting to talk about the persecutions of Christians. As I said, in the year 64, Rome burned. We know this as historical fact. We have the popular culture image of Nero fiddling while the city burns. Didn't actually happen because the fiddle wasn't invented yet, but Nero was not the nicest of the Roman emperors, shall one say politely. I guess you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead. But what Nero did is he used Christians as the scapegoats for the burning of Rome. They were a minority group inside the Roman Empire and inside the city of Rome. They had no real political clout or power, and they were a group of people that could easily be manipulated into the ones at fault for the burnings of Rome. So we've got that in 64. The next persecution is under Decius in the year 250. And there's some confusion about this in the way people term this, so I want to be really clear about it. Decius in the year 250 gives an order that all citizens are to make sacrifices to the gods of Rome under penalty of death. His order does not state that you have to believe in the gods of Rome. It is simply that you must perform sacrifices to the Roman gods to please them and to honestly reinforce the message of the state and the strength of the state as prime or central to the Roman Empire. Christians, as a monotheistic group, do not observe or honor other gods of other religions, and as such, they refuse to make these sacrifices. So even though they're not asked to actually believe in the God of Rome or the gods of Rome, they still refuse to make these sacrifices as an offense to their religious beliefs. As such, there will be persecutions and executions of the Christians for their beliefs. Yes, there will be some people killed in the Colosseum. There will be public executions and public crucifixions. They're not as many as we want to popularly believe. Thanks to 19th century art, we have a belief that this is somehow a widespread, common near extinction of Christians, but it is a persecution nonetheless. In the year 303, Diocletian is going to pretty much do the same thing. He's going to order another round of sacrifices to Rome and the Roman gods. Again, Christians are going to object to this and refuse to take part, and some will be punished for their beliefs. Again, keep in mind, Christianity is one of a number of minority religions that exist at this time throughout the Roman Empire. It's not something as simple as saying it's Rome versus the Christians. It's Rome versus the cult of Isis, the cult of Mithras, the cult of Jesus, the cult of Apollo. There are dozens of micro-religions and minority religions throughout the empire, some of whom play ball with the Republic, and some of whom simply refuse to. And that's an aspect that is forgotten by history, mainly because we come from a Christian tradition or a Christian-dominated tradition, and the cults of Apollo and Mithras and Isis are either dead or so small that no one actually pays much heed to them these days. So these are just three of the persecutions of various levels that take part in Rome. But after 306, we're not really going to see any more of the persecutions present in the Roman Empire. When we do have these persecutions, when we do have people killed. We start seeing the rise of the cult of saints thanks to Christian martyrdom. Martyrdom is the recognition of men and women who have died for the Christian faith. Illustrated here at left, we have Saint Stephen. He is considered the proto-martyr or the first martyr of the Christian church. Stephen was stoned to death by an angry mob in the year 35 when he refused to denounce his beliefs in the Christ, and when he refused to give up. I believe he was carrying a communal or a communion offering or a communion. He was transporting a communion set and to celebrate communion with one of these early Christian communities within a Roman synagogue. He refused to give that up. He refused to denounce his faith. As such, he was stoned to death by the mobs. Actually, in the image here, we have 3 stones painted or present on the shoulders and head of Stephen, showing how he died. What's interesting about the cult of martyrs in the early Christian world is we have Saul of Tarsus as a practitioner of the Jewish faith who leads the persecution of Christians. Saul of Tarsus will encourage their murders. He will encourage hunting down Christians as enemies of Rome, as enemies of Judaism, as enemies of mainstream belief. And ultimately, after a period of time of doing this murder and mayhem against early Christians, Saul will have a conversion experience, most famously on the road to Tarsus, the road to Damascus. He will be struck blind by a vision of the Christ, and once he regains his sight, he will profess a new faith in Christianity. He'll actually change his name to Paul, and he will become a new apostle. He'll proclaim himself a new apostle. And if you look at the New Testament, anything written by Paul or as the letters to the various early churches, they're referred to the Pauline Gospels. They are written by the former Saul of Tarsus, who is kind of an exemplar of the new believer as extreme zealot. He has gone from being a zealot in the persecution of Christians to being a zealot in his faith and a proselytizer, spreading the word. Martyrs, there we go. There will be female martyrs in the church. We see examples here of Felicitas being fed to the lions in the Colosseum. As I said, these did happen. They're not all make-believe. Perpetua is a female martyr who is actually a very wealthy woman in Carthage, which is a North African community and former enemy of Rome. She'll use her power and position to help promote Christianity until she is martyred for her faith in 203. One of the things that the martyrs give us that is so useful in the spreading of Christianity are relics. Some modern believers in Christianity, especially those of the Protestant faith, do not put much store by relics. Relics are very important to the early church, though, as giving physical reminders of the martyrs and their sacrifices to help promote the early church. Here we have a reliquary, which is a special container, in this case a silver and gold box with jewels, that contains the head of St. John Chrysostom of Constantinople. He died in 407. He was a holy man, a leader of the church. When he was killed, his head and other parts of his body probably were saved for posterity as a means of celebrating the faith of this man. Now, if you look, we have the open door on the reliquary. We can see an ear. This is kind of grody. But what it is, I mean, here's a man, he died 1,500 years ago, and yet we have, it looks like the well-preserved ear and head of a saint. One of the reasons that body parts are going to be so powerful as relics is if we have a relic such as this that is still preserved after all these years, it shows the incorruptibility of the saint, that this martyr's faith was so pure that their body does not rot, does not deteriorate after their death. This is just an example of a head. We'll show a couple more examples here in a minute. There are actually churches in Europe that have entire bodies that have that did not rot of some of these saints. Maybe it's a miraculous preservation of the physical remains of the saint. Maybe it's actually just a situation where they were buried in just the right type of climate and circumstance where the body did not decompose. And there are several of these early martyr bodies that don't look to, they have been preserved. They have wax masks have been put on them. The bodies have been taken care of in such a way that perhaps there's been a little stepping in on the part of their believers to preserve the bodies in the years after their death. So this is one relic. We have here the Holy Tongue of Saint Anthony of Padua. Saint Anthony was a believer. He was an early monastic follower of the Christian tradition. He spread the word. He preached the Gospels in such a way that it was said that his tongue brought thousands to the belief in Christ. And as such, after his death, his tongue has been preserved in this golden reliquary here. I believe he is in Portugal. St. Anthony's tongue is in Portugal at this time. We have the Holy Right Hand of Stephen of Hungary. Perhaps the most revered or holiest of relics are those relics associated with Christ. We have the crown of thorns, supposedly preserved in Paris. We have a piece of the true cross here that is in a church in Boston. We even have a cloth that is said to contain remnants of the holy blood of Christ himself. These are most powerful because they are directly related to the life and mission of the Christ on earth. But why would blood be a particularly important form of physical relic of Christ? Since I don't want to give you a minute of dead time, essentially, if you follow Christianity, following the crucifixion and death of Christ, he was laid in the tomb, and after 3 days, he rose from the dead. We're coming up on the Easter season, actually, next week, which is a celebration of the resurrection of the Christ. He then physically ascended into heaven. So, since there was a physical whole body ascension of Christ into heaven, there should be no physical aspects of Christ's body left to worship here on earth. We'll talk about that next time as we wrap up this lecture in the third part. We'll wrap up relics and talk about the use of these relics to promote the faith throughout the empire and how the faith itself will last longer than the empire. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll see you guys on Friday.